Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a time when your voice was silenced, your right to vote denied simply because of the color of your skin. That was the reality for millions of African Americans until the 15th Amendment was passed in 1008, 170, promising equal access to the ballot. But the fight didn't end there. Despite this victory, voter suppression, discrimination, and modern-day tactics continue to threaten our democracy. Today, the 15th Amendment's legacy isn't just a historical milestone, it's an ongoing battle for justice, equality, and the right to be heard. Let's dive into the real story of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. And the passage of the 15th Amendment in 170 marked a monumental shift in the landscape of civil rights in America, enshrining in the Constitution the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This amendment sought to rectify the profound racial injustices that had long defined the electoral process, especially in the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. By prohibiting states from denying the right to vote on the basis of race, the amendment was a crucial step toward dismantling the legal structures that had upheld slavery and institutionalized racial discrimination for centuries. However, the implementation of this new provision was met with fierce resistance in many southern states, where various tactics, including literacy tests, poll taxes, and outright intimidation, were employed to disenfranchise African Americans. Despite these barriers, the 15th Amendment provided a legal foundation upon which future generations could build their fight for equal participation in American democracy. While the full promise of the amendment would not be realized for nearly a century, with the civil rights movement of the 1960s being pivotal in ensuring voting rights for African Americans, the 15th Amendment remains a cornerstone of America's commitment to equality and the principle of universal suffrage. Through its enduring legacy, the 15th Amendment continues to serve as a reminder of the nation's obligation to protect the voting rights of all citizens irrespective of race or ethnicity. It stands as a symbol of the ongoing struggle for justice, a promise made to all who seek to exercise their fundamental right to vote and partake in the democratic process. And the 15th Amendment's impact, though immediate in its legal implications, was not fully realized in practice. For decades after its ratification, African Americans in many parts of the country faced immense challenges in exercising their newly protected right to vote. In the southern states, particularly, systemic efforts to suppress the African American vote were in full force. These methods ranged from literacy tests designed to disqualify voters based on arbitrary and subjective criteria to the imposition of poll taxes that placed financial barriers in front of poorest citizens, many of whom were black. Furthermore, acts of violence and intimidation, often orchestrated by groups like the Ku Klux Klan, created an atmosphere of fear, ensuring that many would be deterred from attempting to vote at all. Even with the legal framework in place, the road to true equality and enfranchisement would be long and fraught with obstacles. The legal battles fought in courts and the peaceful protests that would later erupt in the 20th century all found their foundation in the promise of the 15th Amendment, even as it remained an empty declaration for many. But amidst these challenges, the resilience of the African American community and their allies across the nation began to shine. The 15th Amendment became a rallying cry for those who believed in the sanctity of democratic participation regardless of race. It underscored the importance of not only legal rights, but also the need for societal change, an awakening to the fact that the fight for voting rights was inseparable from the larger struggle civil rights and equality. As communities organized and mobilized in the years following the Civil War, the 15th Amendment's promise became more than just a line in the Constitution. It became a beacon of hope for those committed to ensuring that all Americans, regardless of their racial background, could share in the privileges of citizenship. And in time, the activism that arose from this struggle would manifest in landmark legislation such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which sought to dismantle the remnants of voter suppression that persisted long after the 15th Amendment's passage. The act worked to enforce the principles enshrined in the 15th Amendment by putting in place federal oversight in areas where voting discrimination was still prevalent, ensuring that discriminatory practices would no longer stand in the way of African Americans exercising their right to vote. Yet even as the law guaranteed protection, challenges to voting rights would continue to arise in different forms, reminding the nation that the pursuit of equality and justice is an ongoing endeavor, one that demands vigilance and active resistance against any attempts to reverse the hard-won progress. And what the 15th Amendment also demonstrates is the complexity and gradual nature of societal change. A constitutional amendment, while legally binding, cannot instantly change hearts and minds. It is the collective efforts of individuals, movements, and communities who refuse to accept the status quo that propels society toward the ideals outlined in these legal protections. The enduring struggle of the African American community, along with their allies, has continually reminded us that the battle for voting rights and racial equality is not merely about laws on paper, but about ensuring that these laws translate into real tangible change in the lives of all Americans. The 15th Amendment, then, is not only a historical document, but a living testament to the ongoing struggle for a more inclusive and just democracy. The lesson learned from its passage is clear. A nation committed to equality must also be committed to the enforcement of its principles and to the constant unyielding effort to protect and expand the rights of all its people, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 marked a watershed moment in the struggle to enforce the 15th Amendment's promise of equality at the ballot box. This piece of legislation was not just a response to the blatant voter suppression tactics used in the South, but a reaffirmation of the fundamental belief that voting is not a privilege to be earned, but a right that must be protected for all citizens. Yet, as we reflect on the history of the 15th Amendment and its enforcement, we must recognize that legal victories, while vital, are never the final solution. They are merely stepping stones in an ongoing journey toward full justice and equality. In the decades since the 15th Amendment was passed, many have fought tirelessly to dismantle the remnants of the racist systems that have prevented full participation in the democratic process. However, the reality is that even as legal barriers to voting have been struck down, new challenges continue to emerge, threatening to undo the progress made. In recent years, there have been efforts to introduce new forms of voter suppression, such as strict voter ID laws, the purging of voter rolls, and gerrymandering that disproportionately affect minority communities, particularly Black Americans. And these modern challenges underscore the fact that the fight for voting rights is far from over. The 15th Amendment may have opened the door to voting for African Americans, but it was the collective action of determined individuals and organizations that made that promise a reality. The civil rights movement, for instance, was not just a call for legal reform. It was a call for a moral transformation of the nation, a reminder that the ideals of freedom and equality cannot coexist with systemic disenfranchisement. The leadership of figures like Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis and countless others who faced violence and imprisonment in their pursuit of justice reminds us of the high cost of preserving the right to vote. The fact that these leaders were willing to risk everything, whether it was their safety, their livelihoods, or their lives, demonstrates the immense value they placed on the right to participate in democratic process, and in this light, the 15th Amendment's legacy extends beyond its legal provisions to the broader social and political movements that continue to shape our nation. It is a reminder that the right to vote is not merely a legal formality, but a vital means by which citizens can have their voices heard and influence the direction of their country. Without this right, all other rights are meaningless. This is why the fight for voting rights is so deeply intertwined with the broader struggle for human dignity and equality. The 15th Amendment's significance lies not just in the text of the law, but in the countless struggles, sacrifices, and victories that have followed its passage. It serves as a blueprint for the work that remains, and the continuing efforts to address voter suppression today, whether through legal challenges, grassroots activism, or policy reforms, are an essential part of the legacy of the 15th Amendment. These efforts are a direct challenge to those who would seek to undermine the progress made in the past, a challenge rooted in the same commitment to justice that has driven civil rights movement throughout history. The struggle for voting rights is far from finished, but it is rooted in a tradition of resistance, resilience, and unwavering belief in the potential for change. As we continue to confront new obstacles, we must remember that the power to shape our future lies in our collective action, our refusal to accept injustice, and our commitment to ensuring that every eligible voter can cast their ballot freely and fairly without fear of discrimination or obstruction. The 15th Amendment is not a relic of the past. It is a living testament to the ongoing struggle for a more just and equitable society, one where the rights of all citizens, regardless of their race, are fully protected and upheld. The fight to protect voting rights continues to be a defining struggle of our time. In recent years, the challenge has shifted, but the underlying issues remain the same: how to ensure that every citizen, regardless of race or background, is able to participate fully in the democratic process. As we face new methods of voter suppression, it is clear that the protections established by the 15th Amendment must evolve to meet modern challenges. The ongoing debates surrounding voter identification laws, for instance, highlight a key area of contention. While proponents argue that voter ID requirements are necessary to prevent fraud, critics contend that these laws disproportionately affect marginalized communities, particularly people of color, elderly, and low-income voters. In fact, studies have shown that these laws can lead to significant disenfranchisement, as many eligible voters do not possess the necessary identification or are unable to access the resources to obtain it. In this context, the legacy of the 15th Amendment demands that we continue to fight for access to the ballot, ensuring that no citizen is excluded on arbitrary or discriminatory grounds. And furthermore, the issue of voter roll purging has emerged as another tactic to restrict access to the vote. In some states, voters are removed from the rolls if they have not participated in elections for a certain number of years. While the intent may be to maintain accurate voter rolls in practice, this has often resulted in the removal of eligible voters, particularly in communities of color. These practices are yet another example of how systemic barriers to voting remain entrenched even in the wake of the 15th Amendment. Legal scholars and activists have pointed to the importance of ensuring that voter purges are conducted with transparency and fairness, so that eligible voters are not unfairly disenfranchised. It is through the continued vigilance of civil rights organizations, legal experts, and engaged citizens that we can ensure the protections of the 15th Amendment are upheld in the face of these modern challenges, and equally important is the issue of gerrymandering, the practice of drawing electoral district boundaries in ways that favor one political party over another. This practice has often been used to dilute the voting power of minority communities, effectively diminishing their influence in the political process. The 15th Amendment, while providing a constitutional guarantee against racial discrimination in voting, does not specifically address the issue of gerrymandering. As such, the fight to protect voting rights extends beyond the ballot box to the very structure of the electoral system. In recent years, there have been calls for independent redistricting commissions to take the power to draw district lines out of the hands of partisan lawmakers in order to ensure that districts are drawn in a way that fairly represents the population. Such reforms are critical to ensuring that the promise of the 15th Amendment is realized in practice and that all communities, particularly those historically marginalized, have an equal opportunity to have their voices heard. And the ongoing legal battles surrounding voter rights and the 15th Amendment underscore a fundamental truth. The fight for voting rights is not a one-time battle won with the passage of a single law. It is an ongoing struggle that requires constant vigilance, legal action, and grassroots activism to ensure that all citizens can fully participate in the democratic process. As the political landscape continues to shift, it is clear that the 15th Amendment remains as relevant today as it was when it was passed in 1870. The fight for voting rights is not just a matter of legal principles, but a moral imperative to ensure that the ideals of equality, freedom, and justice are realized for all people regardless of race. The 15th Amendment stands as a powerful reminder that the right to vote is the foundation upon which all other rights rest, and that the work to protect and expand that right is never finished. As we move forward, it is our duty to honor the legacy of those who fought for voting rights in the past, and to continue the fight to ensure that every voice is heard and every vote counts. The 15th Amendment is not merely a historical document. It is a living, breathing promise that must be upheld and protected with the same urgency and dedication as it was over a century ago